So that was a classic Black Skinhead by Kanye West back, when he was kind of pushing the boundary of music, I guess. I thought this would be a fun one to do because it's not necessarily a full guitar song, and I don't think even the original song doesn't sound like that was even a real instrument. Sounds like it was kind of a synth or something. So I thought, could I actually achieve a similar tone to what's on this? And my first thought was like, it sounds like a bass, like a synth bass. So that's the approach I kind of took. Now, I didn't use a bass guitar, as you could see in that little brief little demo. I actually just used a single coil guitar. I imagine any guitar would do this. You might have to tweak certain things, but we've got a compressor on here. The ratio's on 10. You've got the attack quite low, same with the release. The makeup I bumped up to 8, and the mix is 100. Threshold is negative 20 dB. And that kind of gives you that fuller sound, I guess, that kind of replicates a synth, which doesn't have velocity in the notes. So when you're playing, it's kind of the same throughout. It also helps push the amp a little bit too. Now, in the song, because it is a synth, I was like, okay, well, something like I could have used the subharmonic synth maybe, or the mini voicer. I just opted to go for something simple here. So I used the poly octaver, and I've got the dry at 65. I've got the octave at 11% and the sub at 100%. That kind of gives you that detuned synthy type sounds. Now, you could probably achieve this a million different ways, but this was kind of the quickest. I didn't want to spend a huge amount of time trying to figure this out. So that's where we arrived. Now, you probably noticed we've got two overdrives here, so we're going to explain that. I've got these micro tubes, the drive set at 5, and then the other knob's kind of reasonably untouched, except the level. I'm pushing the level a little bit. I just found this gave me a nice boost going into the next overdrive, which is a fuzz, and it just kind of gives you that kind of more broken up distortion synth sound, so that's why that's there. Now, the fuzz, it's clearly a very synth fuzz bass type sound, so I was like, experimented around a little bit, and then I settled on the sustain at 10, the volume moderately high at 8 out of 10, pull back the tone just a little bit because it does have a little bit of a flat sound to it. So that's where we landed on that. That gives the characteristic sound. The fuzz and the poly octaver, I would say, are the two main components of this sound. Of course, the compressor is equally as important. Also worth noting, I've got a noise gate on because turns out two overdrives on here does introduce a decent amount of noise, so I had to turn that on, otherwise it's quite noisy without it. Now we're going to the amp. So I used a bass amp for this, and I experimented around quite a bit. We don't want the bass is important because it gives us those sub frequencies, but one thing that I didn't want to do is make the amp do the majority of the work. It's just the backbone of the tone. So the gain is quite low at 4. The bass has only been pushed to 5.5. You could pull that down. It probably wouldn't make much of a difference. Mid-range is up to 6 just to get the amp to cut through a little bit more. Set the frequency to 3. Treble left at 5. Ultra low and ultra high turned off because once again, this is really kind of the synth-driven sound, so I didn't want to go too crazy. Put the master up to 7.5. Just to kind of get the amp to push a little bit harder with those pedals, and then I had to pull my output down to stop it clipping on the out level there. But that kind of gives you the characteristic sort of bass backbone of this sound. For the cabinet, I just went for a standard 810 Ampeg cabinet. I think that's the only one that's actually on there that you can choose for bass. Yeah, it's the only 810 on there at the moment. And then in the equalizer, I did just a couple little tweaks on here. I did a high pass at 70 just to kind of clean things up. I did do a little dip here at the 300 mark just to kind of clean things up around that band with just the Q size was just 1 on there. I didn't want to go too wide or too surgical on that one. At the 1200, I boosted that 2.5 just to kind of give us some of those more pronounced sort of synth-like qualities. The Q size is a little bit larger on that one, but I found that really kind of also was one of the keys to getting something that sounded good. Without it, the fuzz and the overdrive boost on there, it did tend to kind of I guess, require a little bit tweaking on the EQ. When you start stacking overdrives, you start, I guess, messing with the sound and pushing it, distorting it, especially with this compressor here. So that's kind of why I did that. And then lastly, I did a low pass at the 7,000 mark, just because I wanted to eliminate any of those high hissy frequencies. This is a bass driven sound, so usually I would go 8,000, but 7,000 I wanted a little bit more of a cut, to eliminate too much hiss and anything that kind of above that, especially pick noise. I didn't want pick noise because I was playing with the pick. So that's where I settled on that, and that is essentially the preset here. So really it's a bass amp and some bass pedals with the synth and the compressor in there. And it just gives you that overall sort of distorted, pushed bass sound. You could have achieved this many different ways. You could even achieve this with an amp, a guitar amp, I believe. But I think at the end of the day, it's a bass-driven synth sound. So really, that's kind of where I settled on that. So if you have a Quad Cortex, this is available up on the cloud for you to play with. I'd love to know if you've used it for anything, or you tweaked it and made it better. Or if you're on another modeler as well, like a Tonex or a Helix or something like that, if you're copying along like some of you do, if you're able to achieve this tone similarly using your other modeler or desktop plugins, I'd love to know as well. Let me know in the comments. And if you have any other suggestions like this that are unconventional, please let me know in the comments, because I'm trying to branch out from just doing metal. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video.